gunners in beast mode. K9T soul, cheat code, playing with unlimited free throws.
Hey yo, and we're back. 2022. These past 2 years of music have been really stunning, and 2022 is a great follow-up to 2021's behemoth stack lineup. Like, I wouldn't argue if someone says 2022 was a better year for music than 2021. While 2021 had way higher highs, 2022 was just overall way more consistent throughout. But let's begin. I'm gonna be going over my top 70-ish albums of 2022. If you want to see the full list, it'll be linked down below, as well as a playlist for the 2022 year. Link to join the Discord is down there as well. But let's begin. In the first couple albums here, I'm gonna go through them pretty quickly because there's a lot to get through. And the more we go down the line, the further I'll go into detail for each project. At the bottom of my most favorite of the year, we have none other than Black Star's very highly anticipated follow-up. 20 plus years later, they dropped No Fear of Time with Madlib on the production. Now, being a follow-up to the Black Star album that dropped back in 1998, 20 plus years ago, there was very high expectations for this new album drop from Black Star here. I mean, you got Mos Def and Talib over Madlib production. That is insane to think about. But, of course, it did not quite live up to the hype, but it's still one of my favorite albums of the year. We definitely could have heard something more from this conscious hip-hop duo, but hey, it's better than getting no Black Star release. I'll play a quick sample and we'll move on into the next album.
Executives, you'll always be the winner if you decide what the metric is. Control the game, don't be the game or the predator. Me, myself, and I, such a formidable competitor. Descendant of a king, I got niggas in my bloodline. A true king is fighting with the soldiers on the front line.
Alright, next up we have Brockhampton with TM. Now this is their throwaway final album, and sadly I think it is their worst out of their discog, but there are still some highlights on it, and that is why it's on my favorites near the bottom. Roadrunner really would have been the perfect way to end off the discog. Anyways, we'll play a quick sample and we'll move into the next album.
Seen them lined up and loaded. Some of them boys even look like us. Man, I love my cup double up, and I fuck my thugs that's love. Merlin, I wanna have it banging, keep it southern for ya. I wanna hold it down and keep it coming for you. Right? Tell them motherfuckers they cannot control.
Next up we have Rex Orange County's album Who Cares? It's a real solid bedroom pop, indie pop album, and that Tyler feature is fantastic as well, continuing the crossovers from Flower Boy. But yeah, let's play a quick sample and we'll move on into the next album.
See what the fuck, niggas feeling stuck, really feeling stuck. Like the middle caught on freeway pile up with semi trucks. Open door but you can't, try to run but you can't. Out of breath, you can't vent cause the...
Next up we have 1-800-PAIN with Their Money Is Your Money. It is an ear-blasting industrial hip-hop / deconstructed power noise club album with crazy sample usages all over with Radiohead, Death Grips, and so on, and Andy Morin is even featured on a track in the production. Yeah, let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next one. Beware of your volume for this one. Next up, we have Earl Sweatshirt's Sick. Earl coming back after a while to release another abstract hip-hop album. Not as great as his previous one, of course. I don't know how he will top his opus. But this one is still really good. It has that crazy Arm & Hammer feature as well, but it is incredibly short. But yeah, let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next album.
The flyer said grown and sexy. I came through overproofing a plastic Pepsi bottle. Security didn't check me. Skip coat check. They playing the oldies. I'ma go ahead and get sweaty. Plus save the 10 piece. It's hell up in Harlem, so meet me cross 110th Street.
Next up we have Ethel Cain's album Preacher's Daughter. This is a very interesting album with a very dark concept as well. There are some high peak moments on this album, but the rest of the album and the lower peaks of it does bring it down quite a bit. It is not as consistent. Still one of my favorites of the year though. Let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next album. Next up we have Currency and Alchemist coming back for another collab album with Continuance. I mean, it's all you can expect from an Alchemist collaboration project. Just great production all around and smooth, classy, very chill and enjoyable. Let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next album.
Handing out styles like crack vials, hundreds and stacks, 20s and piles, handful ishing the motherfuckers out.
Next up we have Steve Lacy with Gemini Rights. It's a real nice chill neo-soul / bedroom pop album. We see some of Steve Lacy's best efforts here ever since I found him out from Tyler's collaborations back in the mid-2010s. Yeah, solid album, real chill, just something to listen to in the background as well. Some great moments to find out in this album as well. But yeah, let's play sample and we'll move on into the next album.
Mercury running amok in my mind, can tell if I'm winning or falling behind.
Next up we got Brockhampton back again, and this time it's their other album they dropped, The Family. Now this is basically a Kevin Abstract solo album inspired heavily by Kanye's Chop Up the Soul sample beats. Still, there's still some great moments off this album, even if most of it is derivative. But yeah, we'll play a sample and we'll move on into the next album.
Shut your bitch ass up, nigga. Fuck you to anyone that claimed that they got me. When my heart was low, it turned to comma. But hackers ain't about my gallery open the spurs. The truth is everything we need, can we agree with that?
Next up we have Foxtails with Fawn. It's a screamo / art punk / post-rock album with some passionate performances and great production all around. Let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next album. Next up we got Ninos Del Cerro with Suave Pendiente. Sorry if I pronounced that wrong, but this is a neo-psych / indie rock project with some shoegaze elements as well. Just a real nice psychedelic vibe. Anyways, let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next album. Next up we have Yule with Glitch Princess, and by the name you could probably tell it is a glitch pop album, art pop, and some post-industrial elements in there as well. The concept on here is also very intriguing, and it finishes off with a insane, almost 5-hour long drone piece, which yes, I did listen to the entire thing. But yeah, let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next album. Next up we have Jockstrap with I Love You Jennifer B, and this one is once again another glitch pop / art pop album, but it has a more folk and progressive element to it. It's a very luscious and enjoyable listen. Let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next album. Next up we have Shmino with Love for Rent, which was a surprisingly good drop. It's a pop rap / R&B and neo-soul album, and we see Shmino at his best over here. Let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next album. Next up we have Beyonce with Renaissance, which is probably the best mainstream release this year, unless we count like K-Dot and Weekend. But yeah, it's a house slash dance pop album. So yeah, a very interesting artistic turn for the mainstream. Let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next album.
I be pulling up in a 92 DeVille Cadillac with them always losing my mind. Beastin', an American. I don't need no friends. I've been thugging for my American life, flights in these deep flawless skies.
Next up we have Saba with A Few Good Things, which is a conscious hip-hop album slash a neo-soul project as well, and I do think it is clearly Saba's best. It's not consistent, but there is some real great highlights off of it. But yeah, let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next album.
From what we know about my mother, she was cut from the cloth for South Carolina Gullah. She knew to keep the rule, the right amount of color. Her old soul reminds you of somebody Well, it's smooth the way she did.
Next up we have Joey Badass with 2000. Now this is the highly anticipated follow-up to the now 10-year-old mixtape 1999, and he did not disappoint at all with this follow-up. I don't think it is better than 1999, but 2000 is a great follow-up. Let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next album.
Looking at my generation, overdosed on blue pills, caught up in the matrix. Gotta spread love though, cause it's a lot of hatred. Know it's a marathon and these motherfuckers races. Everybody's dangerous, posing with the strangers just to be famous. It's like you gotta be brainless for real.
Next up we got The Weeknd with Dawn FM. Following up After Hours with that 80s synth-pop style, we get more of it here, but a lot more consistent, with a much more cohesive concept as well. After Hours might have the better standouts, but Dawn FM is a more consistently enjoyable listen. Let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next album.
I try to put up a fight, can't tie me down. I don't wanna sacrifice.
Next up we have Wormrot with Hiss, which is a grindcore album with lots of variety, providing some impressive pockets of sound. Let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next album. Next up we have Chat Pile with God's Country, which is a very disturbing and dark noise rock slash sludge metal album. With a lot of pessimistic concepts and a passionate performance all around. Basically a brutal look at reality. Let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next album.
Smoking weed in my bedroom. Don't watch you. I don't need you. I don't think I forget. They hurt me in a past life, and you were so strange one.
That previous album did mark the top 50 mark, so here we go. We got at 49, it is Rosalia with Motomami, which is an art pop slash Latin electronic album, and it's pretty commonly described as Rosalia's Yeezus because it does quite push some boundaries and include lots of electronic production and experimental production as well. Let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next album.
Cuando pone perla en el collar, te pipián diferentes ya no son perla uno. Cuando los cubitos de hielo ya no se guarda hielo, se congela uno. Cuando de noche en el cielo y se vuelve de día, ya todo eso cambia.
Next up we got Boldy James and Real Bad Man coming back with another collaboration project, but this time it is Killing Nothing. Recently coming off of a variety of collaborations, and a lot of them being with The Alchemist, which are probably his best collaborations without a doubt, but this one, it does prove to be great as well. Out of all the projects he did drop in 2022, I'd have to pick this one as my favorite out of them. Let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next album.
I'm just trying to catch a riff. Tripping off of these trippy snacks, I'm seeing visions. I'm seeing visions.
Next up we have KG and LW with Omnium Gatherum. Now this is probably King Gizzard's most variety-packed album. It's almost like a compilation. We get to hear them explore a plethora of genres in just 80 minutes, and it probably has one of the best King Gizzard album openers I've ever heard, with the dripping tap with a very Swans and GYBE feel. Anyways, let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next album. Next up, we have Beach House with Once Twice Melody. It's a dream pop and neo-psych album, and it is probably their most ethereal album yet. And you can argue it is their best as well. But yeah, it's super atmospheric and melodic as said by the name. Let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next album. Next up, we got Cities of Eve with Man Plays the Horn, which is a very trippy, abstract, and experimental hip-hop album. It is incredibly psychedelic and hypnotic. Definitely is one of the better abstract releases of the year. Let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next album.
You and I too, to the last man. At the ceremony, man plays the horn. Yeah.
Next up, we got Billy Wood's collaboration with Messiah Music with Church. I mean, it's what you could really expect from a Billy Woods project. Incredibly dense writing and super abstract production to back it up. Nothing really above and beyond here, but still a standout. Let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next album. Next up, we got Bjork with Fulsora. This is one of her most exciting releases up to this point because it's kind of been a downhill trend, but this is a breath of fresh air. A super interesting concept album with very intricate writing as well, and of course Bjork's performance is great as well. The production on here is also extremely different, and as a post-industrial element, we definitely need more post-industrial Bjork. Death Grips collab again when, but anyways, let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next album. Next up, we got Quelle Chris with Death Fame, which is another abstract hip-hop album, and there are many great abstract hip-hop releases this year, and this is definitely one of them, even if this one does seem a bit low energy. But yeah, let's play a sample, and we'll move on into the next album.
I came up on both sides like the Lorient doors. If heaven's got a ghetto, hell's got a resort. Besides yourself with anger or inside you with thought. Repeat until you see desired results. When bro was flipping birds, I was scripting words. I admired the fraud thinking.
Next up, we got FKA Twigs with Capper Songs. Now, this is actually a mixtape, but it's a great follow-up to the 2019's Magdalene. Now, Capper Songs is probably not her best, but it's still a great release from her, and it's definitely one of the most enjoyable listens of the year. But yeah, let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next album. Next up, we have another mixtape, but this time it's Mike with Beware of the Monkey. Now, Mike has been consistently dropping since 2015, and there have been some highlights out of those drops, and this is probably one of them. Of course, it is an abstract hip-hop release, and it's short and to the point, and this is probably the best mixtape of 2022. Let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next album.
Limp in my strong face, we young, but we really came from shit such a long way. Ain't nobody gave me hints, so it's gone. Changed my thoughts and my spirit too convinced of these false chains. I ain't a nigga I
Next up, we got Cities of Eve once again, and this time it's working title for the album Secret Waters. Pretty long title, I'm just gonna call it Secret Waters. This is a direct follow-up to Man Plays the Horn, but here it is so much more focused and compact, and he managed to outdo himself in the same year. One of the most underrated and underlooked abstract/experimental hip-hop artists of the past decade. And in the new decade here, we get a more consistent and groundbreaking catalog. Let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next album.
Black churches, ceremonial Davucci turban, the politics stash urban, tight blacker than blue, crush groove on a new moon, landscape push through, do you true with it however, kneel by mouth, reasonable doubts, perfidious Southside, you ever made a toast that...
Next up, we got Benny the Butcher with Tana Talk 4. Coming off of his recent projects, there was some hype because The Plugs I Met 2 was really solid, and Burden of Proof was a great project, and of course, the previous part to this, Tana Talk 3, also a great project as well. So expectations were pretty high for Tana Talk 4, and I think they were met. Griselda is at its best when it's dark and gritty. Let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next album.
And this east side shit still in me. My ability to turn words to imagery. Probably the reason they gon' remember me. Figure we walk this tightrope with a feline's agility. The streets did so much shit to me, I could never live civilly. I can never lead a scene without checking my mirrors visually. Come with that.
Next up, we got Viagra Boys with Cave World. And this is one of the bands a part of this whole new wave of just fantastic art punk music. It's bands like this, Idols, and a couple other bands I'll talk about later in the list that are just creating this whole new era for this genre, and it's amazing to see. But yes, this is a dance punk album with some hints of industrial rock in there and synth punk as well. It is very sarcastic, it has a lot of humor and satire, and it is pretty self-aware as well. But that does not take away from the fact that there is a great concept laid out here as well. Let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next album. Next up, we got Always with Blue Rev. And this is an indie/noise pop album with some shoegaze and psychedelic elements in there as well. There's lots of jangle in here as well, so it creates a nice combination. Let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next album. Next up, we got KGLW once again, and this time it's Ice, Death, Planets, Lungs, Mushrooms, and Lava. Another very long album title. This is KGLW's concept album, and it is a pretty great one. It is jazz rock and psych rock as well, with some real nice progressions as well. It's 7 tracks at just over an hour, and it has some of my favorite tracks that this band has dropped this year. Let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next album. Next up, we got Richard Dawson with the Ruby Chord, which is the conclusion to the very fantastic trilogy which started in 2019 with 2020, Hanky, and now the Ruby Chord. And while it's not my favorite out of the trilogy, I think it is the second best. I mean, it might seem very intimidating because the album opener is over 40 minutes long, but when you really get into it, it really is one of the best progressive folk albums to come out this year. Let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next album. Alright, we are entering the top 30 now, and with it we got The Smile with A Light for Attracting Attention. It's an art rock / post-punk album, and it features 2 members from Radiohead, and that being Tom York and Johnny Greenwood, and with that you can already expect a really great album. There is moments of some of the best art rock I've heard throughout the year on this album, and that is very amazing considering just how competitive that genre is this year. Let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next album. Next, we got Charlotte and Bolus with Topical Dancer, which is an extremely groovy art pop / synth pop and tech album. I guess it's more tech pop than synth pop, but yeah, it is extremely groovy. It's very conscious as well, but that doesn't get in the way with the groove. It is one of the most creative things I've heard this year. Let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next album.
You're cold as ice. I wanna make you feel real nice. I wanna make you feel real nice. I bet this song sounds real familiar.
Next up we got Cult of Luna with The Long Road North, and this is a sludge metal / post-rock album, and this was actually my introduction to this band, so yeah, it was a really great introduction for me. And I definitely did go back and go through the discography, and it is a pretty great one with lots of dense and atmospheric instrumentation and some amazing progressions as well, and some great performances as well. It's a very distinctive tone, and the whole aura this album creates gets you hooked. Let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next album. Next up we got Lupe Fiasco with Drill Music in Zion, and as expected from Lupe, it is a conscious hip-hop album, and this time it has a jazz rap side as well. This is probably one of my favorites, if not my absolute favorite Lupe project in like a while, like since his debut, and I could confidently say it's one of his best as well. Of course, being by Lupe, it's incredibly poetic and conscious, and it is extremely introspective as well. Lupe is seriously up there as one of the best writers and performers, and you could see it here very clearly. But yeah, let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next album.
Correspondent, opera onyx, populars for convicts, stay below the Doppler, turn robotniks into sonics, position jostlers, monitor hegemonics, robots make the robots that solder the electronics, Nostradamus can bother to keep a promise.
Next up we got Sudan Archives with Natural Brown Prom Queen. It's an R&B neo-soul / art pop album. It boasts a large variety in the production side. It's incredibly melodic and it's very triumphant and dense as well, with some great performances all around. Let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next album.
Cause she laid on her back. Well, that's how it seemed to her mommy and daddy. Crying on a boyfriend, they would never understand me. When all she wanna do is watch Sailor Moon, smoke weed or stare up at the moon.
Here we are at the top 25, and at 25 we have Gospel with The Loser, the highly anticipated follow-up to the album that is almost 20 years ago now, which is their debut, and that debut is a fantastic one. But The Loser, this is a more toned down album compared to their debut. It is not as aggressive, but it still does pack a great punch. It's a post-hardcore / progressive rock album, and of course there are some screamo elements there as well. It's heavy, it's complex, and it's really great. Let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next album. Next up we got Freddie Gibbs with Soul Sold Separately. Now up to this point, Freddie Gibbs' discography has been one of the best from the 2010s, and even in 2020 we got the fantastic Alfredo. So the hopes were high for that next Madlib collaboration or maybe another Alchemist collaboration, but instead we get the Soul Sold Separately, which is a variety-packed album from Freddie Gibbs and probably his most mainstream yet. I mean, the producer lineup is just stacked here. There's Madlib, DJ Dahi, James Blake, Boy Wonder, The Alchemist, Kaytranada, and some more too. But of course, having so many tracks from different producers, it becomes incredibly difficult to make a full cohesive piece. And Freddie Gibbs manages to do it very well here, and the transitions and everything is on point in this album. Freddie Gibbs, as always, is at the top of his flow game with just incredible flows, mind-blowing, and it's a pretty cool concept album as well, though it does not come close to albums in the past he's done like Alfredo, Bandana, and Pinata. We will hope that Freddie Gibbs does manage to release that other collaboration project with Madlib. We'll hope. But yeah, let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next album.
I thought we was gon' thug it out to the end, but I guess that shit it wasn't in the plans. I pray this chopper never jam. Dirty 30 in my hand, shoot him if he ain't DOA, we shoot up the ambulance. Nigga ain't no solving no murder, welcome to murderland. Bulletproof my shit, they might hit it, bitch, I'm the murder man. There nigga put his hands on me.
Next up, we got Pusha T with It's Almost Dry. Also one of the most anticipated follow-ups, and Daytona was a fantastic drop from Pusha T during 2018, and that whole run Kanye did in 2018 was pretty insane. But now we get It's Almost Dry, and this time it's half Kanye produced and half Pharrell produced, which is insane in its own right. Yeah, some of the features don't have that great sound quality for some reason, but the production just goes so damn hard on this album, and it's probably a better produced album than Daytona. Pusha T's performance on here is also great as always. Much like Freddie Gibbs, I mean, it's fitting that they're beside each other here on my list. Let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next album.
Coca leaf and potpourris, chains over Lacoste Sportif. Don't brag rich to me if they ain't tell you to bring your skis. My protect hers petite.
Next up we got Gaius Guevara with There Will Be No Super Slave. I found out about this artist in 2021 and I've been following ever since. The production style, the cadence, the flow, very similar to JPEG Mafia. On this album though, it's much more political than his previous, and this one involves a lot more Chipmunk soul in the production compared to his previous release, and honestly it is extremely addicting. Very great production and very nice concepts as well. The sampling is immaculate. There's a real aggressive and passionate nature to this album as well, which makes it even more better. But it's not all too serious. There are some very fun moments on this album as well. But yeah, let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next album.
Do not stain from the sadist, but I cannot see where they at. We've been perturbing the woman, is Ayokiji as the terminal. You ain't checking and we ain't never heard of you. All of the agony felt like a slap on the wrist, but for you it's feeling like a tourniquet. Why don't you send me the tears? White folks keep me out of your prayers. I know it's evil incarnate.
Next up we got Haru Nemuri with Shunka Ryojin, following up her phenomenal release in 2018. Of course, this is a J-rock album, but this has a more art pop side compared to its former noise pop side on the previous album. Haru does also spit some bars here and there like always. It's an incredibly passionate and chaotic album, this one, but also very addicting and energetic as well. And if we don't count mixtapes, this is in my top 20 for 2023. Just an incredibly fun record with some of her most raw performances yet and some of her most fun performances all around on this album. Let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next album. Now, counting mixtapes, we are now entering the top 2020. Next up we got Death's Dynamic Shroud with Dark Life. This is a glitch pop slash vaporwave album with some post-industrial elements, and of course there is progressive electronic moments here as well. And I think this takes the cake as my favorite DDS album, and it's arguably the best one. It's super electronic, super futuristic, and it has lots of amazing melodic moments as well, and some of the progressive natures in some of these tracks are very fascinating to witness. A very great forward-thinking album here. Let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next album. Next up, we got a very surprising one here, and it is Quadeca with I Didn't Mean to Haunt You. Now, I found out about Quadeca around last year, or 2021, like late 2021, when he released his album, his other album. And that album that released in 2021, I wasn't too crazy about it. Yes, there were some great moments off that album, like Sisyphus, but the rest was just extremely lacking and derivative. But I Didn't Mean to Haunt You is the full transition for Quadeca, and this is the moment where he chose to make meaningful art rather than just satisfying a bunch of people. And I Didn't Mean to Haunt You is his magnum opus. It is an art pop and folk electronic album with some experimental hip hop, some post-industrial elements in there as well, and some just insane psychedelic moments. The progressions, the instrumentation is fascinating. It's very heavy and distorted at times. The distortion used throughout the album is also a huge role, and it plays into the concept as well. And the way the concept is laid out is very clear, and it's also done extremely well too. It's an album full with so much passion and substance. It is something you will get plenty out of listening multiple times. Also, Danny Brown feature, Sunday Service feature, and Thor Harris from Swans on the drums on the final track. Very insane. Let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next album. Next up, we got Perfume Genius with Ugly Season. Perfume Genius has been a really great artist for the past couple years now, and leading up to this album, there have been some really great drops, and even the most recent one in like 2021 or 2020, that was a great release. But this time, we get what might be Perfume Genius's most experimental album yet, Ugly Season. It is, of course, an art pop album, but it is experimental. There is a huge experimental tone to this whole thing. It is very ambient, it is very psychedelic, it has that huge avant-garde element, but it's so damn ethereal and atmospheric. It is suspenseful as well. Like, some of the progressions of the instrumentation is just mind-blowing. Now, it's not all that perfect, otherwise it would be much higher for sure, but the moments that this album has are some real highs. Like, it is stunning, super creative and artistic. Let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next album. Next up, we got Little Sims with No Thank You. Out of nowhere, Little Sims decided, hey, let's drop an album at the end of the year, and this is what we got. Coming off the success of 2021's Sometimes I Might Be Introvert, widely considered one of the best, if not the best, hip-hop album of the decade. No Thank You still has some of those Simby type beats in here, lots of orchestration and grand production, but it's also much more stripped back. Like, there's some tracks on here that's really stripped back, and it's just Little Sims spitting fire, flames, and heat. While I don't think this comes close to Sometimes I Might Be Introvert's production, the lyrics and the whole cadence and the comfortable flow on here is way better. Sometimes I Might Be Introvert might have the better concept, the better production, and some better performances, but we get just a heat-packed short album here, and it is amazing. Let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next album.
Cutting through the jungle in an all-black fitted hat, low, incognito living. Introvert, but she ain't timid. My art will be timeless. I don't do limits. No. Be very specific when you talk on who the best is. How can I get?
I was not joking when I said this is a great year for abstract hip-hop. Next up, we got Elucid with I Told Bessie. This is an experimental hip-hop / abstract hip-hop album, as expected from Elucid, the other half of Arm & Hammer. 2021 had the absolutely mind-blowing collaboration between The Alchemist and Arm & Hammer, and that was some of the best abstract hip-hop I've ever heard. And here we get Elucid's solo album, and of course we got Billy Wood's solo album as well, two of them, and I'll talk about one later. But this one, it is Elucid's best album yet, his most complete and his most focused one as well. There are a lot of great producers here as well, and that's one of the extremely high points for this album. The production on this album is fantastic. You got The Alchemist, Child Actor, Messiah Music, and a few others there as well. And for the features, we got Quelle Chris here. Of course, Billy Woods is here. No one was expecting Billy Woods to not be on this album. And you got, of course, Pink Sifu here as well. It's an incredibly dark and ominous sound. Of course, it is super abstract. The samples used here are fantastic as well. It is some of Elucid's most passionate performances as well on here, and that is amazing to see for his solo album. And of course, the writing is incredibly dense, being the second half of Arm & Hammer. Spelling and Betamax are some of my favorite songs of the year in general, and it's just amazing to see Elucid pushing it even further on the solo side, and not just with Billy Woods on Arm & Hammer. Because on the other side, we've seen Billy Woods drop fantastic solo albums already, but never Elucid. So yeah, this was a really nice treat. And I heard this album was a tribute to someone, so that's probably why it was so much more focused, and the passion here is on a high too. Hey, if Tom York approves this album, you know it's good. Anyways, let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next album.
Colors a little more glorious, bleeding through the edges, we don't really need no altars. No one leaves a message, nigga heaven, I done leveled up. Puffin' flower petals, I'm the blackest metal, this a dead church. I believe in black people,
Next up, we got Kendrick Lamar with Mr. Morale and the Big Steppers. After many years, people were almost tired of waiting for a new K-Dot drop, just like people are right now waiting for that new Frank Ocean drop, Frank Ocean Where, but it is to be expected. With a discography as insane as he has Good Kid, Mad City, and T-Pap back to back, like that is insane. People were highly anticipating some greatness here. While Damn is not his best project, it was a huge success for the mainstream, and it was a lot of people's favorite K-Dot album. So when that announcement came out of nowhere, everyone was on high alert mode, because this is the guy that is gonna save everything. And with this album, we get the end of the Savior complex that he's been building onto, and this is his most personal and introspective one yet. Production-wise, it is also some of the most complex and layered production we've heard K-Dot rap on for a while now. Production on tracks like the initial starting track, United in Grief, one of my favorite K-Dot album openers, and that is saying a lot when you have stuff like Shireen and Wesley's Theory as well. Father Time, Savior with that woozy, ethereal, and psychedelic beat. And then there's Auntie Diaries, which is like a progressive rap epic. Then you have the extremely toned down, stripped back, and in your face personal Mother I Sober. As much as I would love a full, complex, and dense album like T-Pap from K-Dot, in this day and age there are people that are going to not like that. So of course there are some bangers here and there as well. Not to say T-Pap doesn't have bangers as well, but not as simplistic. The writing here is also fascinating. K-Dot's storytelling has not dropped down a level one bit. He is right there at the top of his game here, and you can really bear witness to that in tracks like Father Time, Mother I Sober, Auntie Diaries, and Worldwide Steppers, and his performance factor is there as well with the insane We Cry Together, which reminded me a lot of the track You off of T-Pap, and that is regarded as like one of the best performed and written songs of the decade. In short, this album did not disappoint for the hype it had to live up to. I know some people were probably disappointed after this extremely long wait, but this is an album to sit with. This is an album that has infinite replay value because you get everything out of it the more you listen. There is lots of complexity and lots of dense layers to this album to pick apart, and as time passes by, I think people will begin to like this album more and more, just like when T-Pap first released and people did not like T-Pap. And now T-Pap is regarded as one of the greatest hip-hop albums of all time and just one of the greatest albums of all time in general. So yes, it is a fascinating concept album here and one of the best of the year for sure. Highly recommend this one. Let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next album.
I ain't taking shit back, like it when they pro-black, but I'm more Kodak black. Tell me where the money at, ayy, where the homies at. Universal call out, I can members only that, ayy. CC, wait a minute, ben aquí, c'est la vie, I tell the whole truth from A to Z.
Next up, we got Denzel Curry with Melt My Eyes, See Your Future, and for specifics, it is the deluxe version. Now you're probably thinking, why the deluxe? Well, this is an album where the deluxe is actually a huge step forward, and I think a lot of people that are trying to hop on this deluxe train should learn from Denzel here, because the deluxe album is a huge transformation and it completely changes the listening experience, because the tracks on here, of course you get the normal tracks, but then it's a cold-blooded soul version, so you get live instrumentation and soul type harmonies and performances. It is just fantastic. Now, even just the bass album alone, it is really great, one of the best of the year for sure. And I would actually put this under Kendrick Lamar's album, but the cold-blooded soul version is just so damn good that I had to put it above. So yeah, of course, this is a jazz rap album and a conscious hip-hop album, and it is one of Denzel's most mature and focused projects yet, with a clear concept like there was on Taboo, but it dives into a much more diverse production style. And the writing on here is heat. It is real hot flames and heat. This is Denzel's one of his best performed albums and also probably his best written album as well. He was writing on fire on this thing, and this is an album that could survive back in the 90s. The bars, the wordplay, the technique, everything is there. It is so intelligent, but at the same time, it's extremely well performed on top of that, and of course, it is very well produced. The cold-blooded soul version of this album is without a doubt Denzel's best project to date. And even if we don't count the deluxe and just the base album, it is some of his best performed and once again his best written ever, and the production on here is nuts as well. The concept is very similar to K-Dot's album as well, which is pretty funny that they are beside each other on my list here, but it is very fitting. And it's also extremely diverse, like I mentioned before. It is not strictly one sound. You get a variety on this album, and it is done in a very cohesive and focused way. The flow of the album is seamless, the transitions are smooth, and you get just Denzel on top of it, just floating across every single track. It is a thing to witness for sure. So yeah, highly recommend this one as well. Well, going forward, I highly recommend everything here. So yeah, it is just an insane experience. And that Cold-Blooded Soul version, man, it is beautiful. But yeah, let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next album.
Describe it as raw and real. I'm dealing with all the ills. I'm tearing up like I'm on Dr. Phil. What? And you should got a wow. And you should got a wow. Who the fuck said start the trap, bro? Let a real nigga talk. Hey, I want from the bitches, I want from the friendship, I want from some ditches. And lately, my nigga, I'm feeling indifferent. I wish y'all the best and believe that I meant it.
I tried to crack a smile and still the frown follows right behind. Like the sword, like the door, fuck the wall. In the guards, like some bitch, no remorse. Never did we get the best. Dropping balls like a story. Falling from the prison floor. Fucking bitch, fucking bitch. Say my name, I tell it back. I'm sure like a door.
Next up, we got Nas with King's Disease 3, and this is a part of the absolutely insane run that Nas has been going on with Hit Boy, and it seems with every single project these two collaborate on, it just gets better and better. Like last year, we got the fantastic King's Disease 2 and the surprise drop at the end of the year with Magic, which is up there as one of my favorite projects from Nas, and this collaboration has brought out the best in Nas once again. It has reignited a long blown out fire in Nas, and he is there once again, back near, and you can say he is hitting a second prime. Like he mentioned before, he says he's in rare form, and that is no different for this one because King's Disease 3 is on record to top all of his recent projects he's dropped. Honestly, after the multiple listens, it became very clear that King's Disease 3 is clearly on another level. And 30 years in, it is just insane to see Nas hitting a second prime. And let's not just brush past Hit Boy. Hit Boy is the one on the production for all of these recent projects, and he is the one who's able to bring out Nas at his full form. And making the production sound as amazing as it is on King's Disease 3, 2, and Magic, Nas is just able to easily float over everything that Hit Boy does. And I thought Magic and some tracks in King's Disease 2 was peak production from Hit Boy, but on King's Disease 3, we get an incredible run of tracks where Hit Boy is just not messing around. And Nas is in his second prime like he's back in the 90s once again. There's just plenty of insane moments off this album that'll make your jaw drop. And one of them for me that really stood out was, of course, first of all, the huge first run of tracks. But near the end, there is that sample flip of New York State of Mind. And that was insanity, and it really felt like Nas was back in the 90s. So yeah, obviously no, it is not better than Illmatic or any of the first couple albums he did release. But this far in, 30 years in, 3 decades in, he's able to drop material like this. It is truly insane. And there's someone else on this list that is doing pretty much the same thing here, where he's hitting like a second prime at a very late point in the career. King's Disease 3 is a 9 out of 10 album for me, and it is something that keeps on giving. And if someone was to die on the hill trying to argue that this is the best hip-hop album of the year, I wouldn't waste time arguing because it's not even that far off. But yeah, let's play sample and we'll move on into the next album.
Now's a hit like Michael and Quincy on the run again. Eardrums diversionized from the words of mine. Just a word of advice, you can't murder Nas. All my niggas certified, we got certain ties. I'm activated, my hair might spark flames. Aviator frames, bandages.
Next up, we got Ways or Wise Blood with And in Darkness, Hearts Aglow. And this is a singer-songwriter slash Baroque pop album. And it is the highly anticipated follow-up to the 2019 album Titanic Rising, which was like up there as one of the best projects of the decade in the 2010s. And for it being released that late into the decade, it is really impressive. But fast forward to now, we get the other drop, and it's almost like a direct continuation, but the energy seems a bit more toned down. Regardless, this is one of the best of the year for sure. There is hints of the progressive nature still laced throughout this album, and of course there is just absolutely stunning moments as well. Much like its sister album, it's extremely lush and ethereal. It is very soothing. There is hints of psychedelia throughout as well. Tracks like the album opener and God Turned Me Into a Flower is up there as one of her best ever, and the production throughout the album is also fantastic as well, much like Titanic Rising. While I do like Titanic Rising much better on a different level, it's not like it's not close at all. Like, you could probably say this is your favorite, and I wouldn't be too surprised. So yeah, if you're looking for a surreal album experience and a very ethereal one as well, much like a beach house album, but much more intimate, Wise Blood has 2 albums here that I highly recommend if you haven't listened to Titanic Rising, and of course this one, And in Darkness, Hearts Aglow. But yeah, it is definitely one of the most stunning releases of the year, and it is an experience every single time. Let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next album. Next up, we got Big Thief with Dragon New Warm Mountain, I Believe in You. This is a super massive indie folk slash folk rock album, and there's some like alt country, neo psychedelia. There's just so much packed into this album. Looking at the track list and you see 20 tracks, you might think it is bloated, but it is in no way bloated. There's some passionate performances all across and some playful ones as well. It is very poetic, and it's also raw at some times as well. The writing on this album is phenomenal. It creates just stunning imagery and real heavy gripping themes that aim straight for the heart. The writing can seem cryptic at some points as well, and it is very fun to take apart when it is. It's also very introspective as well. The instrumentation throughout the album is also fantastic. The production, phenomenal. The band here aimed to make their best, and this is without a doubt their best project to date. It is an incredibly complex and intricate piece of art, and it is one of the best of the year without a doubt. The writing on here is next level. The performance is passionate and next level. The production and instrumentation and the band is phenomenal as well. For a project with 20 tracks and not feeling slow or bloated is an impressive achievement. The album cover is just so perfect to sum up this album in one picture. It is essential because you get just endless amounts of details to look through in the production and all of the performances as well. And I think it is arguably one of the best, if not the best, written albums of the year. So yeah, a super unique, fun, and almost depressing album at some points. A true passion project and one to not miss for sure. Let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next album. Next up, we got Natalia Lafourcade with De Todas las Flores. Apologies if I did pronounce that wrong. Yeah, this is a singer-songwriter slash Mexican folk album. Also has lots of hints of jazz as well. It's definitely one of the most luscious and hypnotic albums this year. The production is incredibly complex and soothing. It's definitely one of those albums that will leave you just with your jaw dropped on the ground. Like, the track run on here is phenomenal, and the standout tracks as well is unbelievable. It's a progressive experience that also has a very warm and acoustic feel at many points. It actually is very stripped back and acoustic throughout the album, but there are moments of progressions and builds of instrumentation, and it's also incredibly poetic on top of it. And on top of that, the vocal performances all throughout are fantastic. It's honestly all you can ask for in an album like this, and it does that and more. If you're looking for a more calm and soothing, relaxing vibe, this is definitely one of them. The thing that really caught me when I listened to this is the phenomenal production. It is near flawless, and with the passionate vocal performances and everything else backed with it, this is definitely easily one of the best of the year and my top 10 most favorite. Yeah, what an insane album to start off the top 10. The live instrumentation, the poetry, the performances is just all just a phenomenal experience throughout. And I won't doubt anyone that puts this in their top 5 or even their top 3 or top 1 even, because this is a project that truly deserves it. Let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next album. Next up we got Ash Inspire with Hostile Architecture. It's an avant-garde and prog metal album, and I think it's safe to say that this is one of the best, if not the best, metal albums I've heard in the past like 20 years. It's a super chaotic and cryptic album with a very intriguing concept as well. The performance here from the main man is very different and very unique. It's almost like a performance of something you would hear off like a Daughters album, like You Won't Get What You Want. It's a spoken word type performance, but just filled with so much passion and aggressive and dark energy, almost anxiety inducing, much like an album I did mention earlier on in the list, Chat Pile's God's Country. But what Hostile Architecture has to offer is so much more on the production side as well. On top of the amazing and anxiety-inducing performances, we also get the manic production. And on the production side, it very much reminds me of a Black Midi in a way, where there's so much chaos and manic energy and just heavy, dense instrumentation layered on top of layers, but it's so intelligently put together, and it's very distinctive and complex. It's controlled chaos, almost in its best form. It's abrasive, noisy, dense, and extremely angry at some points. The progressive natures in some of these tracks are just amazing to witness, because you get these huge builds in instrumentation, and then you just get these walls of sound, and it's super dense and super heavy. The concept on here is political at many points, and there is a huge sense of anarchy all across. I did notice many albums exploring similar themes this year, and some examples is, of course, like I mentioned before, Chat Pile's God's Country and Viagra Boys' Cave World. So maybe we are headed into anarchy, we will see. But this album is not shy at displaying it at all. It's very raw, unfiltered, and rebellious. With the insane crushing production, it makes a nice contrast with the spoken word poetic moments. It is one hell of a project, and it's one of the best metal albums I've heard in a long while. Let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next album.
Forsaken town! Always 3 months to the gutter! Never 3 months to the top!
Next up, we also got an incredibly dark project here as well. It is Backwash with His Happiness Shall Come First Even Though We Are Suffering. Backwash back at it with the long album titles, but this is what I assume the final part to the fantastic industrial hip-hop trilogy that Backwash has been cooking up for the past couple years, which began with the incredible album that released in 2020, was it, with God Has Nothing to Do With It, Leave Him Out of It. And in 2021, we got my favorite Backwash project, which is I Lie Here Buried With My Rings and My Dresses. But to end off this industrial hip-hop and industrial metal crossover trilogy, we get the amazing album here. It has some of the most unhinged Backwash performances I've heard yet, and some of the most fantastic production on a Backwash project yet, very close to the level of the previous album. Much like the rest of the trilogy, it is extremely heavy and dark. It is super aggressive and disturbing as well. It's a scary and ruthless look at reality. But on this album here, we get one of the most introspective performances from Backwash yet, diving into that very personal subject matter, but at this time, instead of just it being all dark and grim and death, we get somewhat of a resolution and acceptance, whether that be a good or a bad thing. There's an incredible amount of passion and pain put to each performance and track throughout the whole trilogy, but even on here, it is displayed incredibly well. There are some lighter moments on this album with some incredible sampling to back it up, but that does not take away from the ruthless energy displayed all across. And on the production, it's also very heavy and dense. It is so chaotic and noisy and in your face. Much like the last two albums, it is an album that is aiming straight for your neck with no remorse. Of course, concept-wise, there is the political themes in there, the religious themes as well, but we get to hear much more of Backwash's thoughts after the storm. And the final track on the album gives us a moment of clarity as well, and it's probably the best way it could have finished up or wrapped up the trilogy. This is up there as one of my favorite industrial hip-hop albums, next to the other ones as well. And I think it's up there as one of the best industrial hip-hop trilogies of all time. We see some of the most creative production yet to land on a Backwash album, and the features on here are also very diverse and distinctive. We have some of the favorite names returning from the previous album here, and that was nice to see, but also a very surprising feature with Gaius Guevara. This is definitely the most atmospheric part in the trilogy, but like I mentioned before, that does not take away from the super hard hitting moments on this album, and man do they punch with force. And some days I do enjoy this more than I Lie Here Buried, but then some days I go back to that album and I just listen to it again in full and realize that I Lie Here Buried is still my favorite Backwash project, but the wrap up to the trilogy is in no way far from either of the two previous parts. It is right up there in terms of quality, performance, production, and everything else. A crushing and passionate album that I highly recommend if you are interested in industrial and hip-hop or metal. Backwash is without a doubt one of the best when it comes to fusing these two genres together. Let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next album.
Don't splatter, he's calling, he want answer. Phone hang up, hanging outside with old Yella. See where this heart's headed? Now he's so hot-headed. Victim turned pot kettle. He's with a hot metal.
Next up, we got Conway the Machine with God Don't Make Mistakes. As expected, this is a hardcore hip-hop / conscious hip-hop album. And let's just start off real quick by saying this is without a doubt the best Griselda project, and it is Conway's best project to date. Conway is up there as one of the best writers and performers, and the way he was able to just easily top his previous album is very fascinating. Griselda as a whole is a thing to witness for the past couple years, and this is definitely Conway's statement album here, while also being his most introspective and personal yet. And the production to back up this album is phenomenal as well. One of the best produced Griselda albums I've heard, with huge variety where we get the classic dark gritty Griselda beats, and on the other side we get the more catchy melodic and glossy type of chipmunk soul direction. The storytelling on here by Conway is phenomenal. It is extremely captivating, and we don't have to talk about the flow game and everything else in that whole vein and skill set, because Conway is just at the top already, and he is at the top of his game for this project. Super creative flows, intelligent word plays, incredible rhyme schemes. It's Conway. What do you expect? It is one of the best. But like mentioned before, the storytelling here is taken to another level, and the production choices are much more diverse and addicting while also keeping the whole album cohesive. Like some great producers return here, like The Alchemist and Hit Boy. And on the feature side, we have some of the best features to land on a Conway album. And of course, there is the Griselda cut with Benny and Westside Gunn on John Woo Flick, which is one of the most insane Griselda tracks ever. Conway was able to create a very vulnerable project while also keeping it extremely dark and gritty. The track Stressed is one of my most played songs of the year, and that track is just one of the many highlights on this album. And the title track for the album Closer is one of Conway's best ever. This is without a doubt one of the best albums of the year in general, and it's arguably like the best hip-hop album of the year. I wouldn't argue it, even though there is a lot of competition going up ahead. There is no doubt in my mind that someone could put this as their number one, because it deserves it, and it can definitely be up there. The only thing that is not so great on this album is Conway's singing. Conway does reach these random pockets of singing where he just wants to sing. I mean, it's cool, there's lots of variety in that, but Conway himself is just not that great at singing, so it just sounds very odd. But even with that, it is a near perfect album, and probably a future Conway classic. Well, we'll see if he's able to top this, but I highly doubt it. Let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next album.
Not too long after my cousin hung himself, I never told nobody, but I lost a son myself. Imagine being in the hospital holding your dead baby, and he looked just like you. You trying to keep from going crazy. That's my word. That's why I drink a bottle daily for all the shit I keep bottled in lately. Do anybody care that I'm stressed?
Next up, we got Billy Woods with Ethiops. And yes, this is the other album I was talking about. The other half of Arm & Hammer, Billy Woods, has dropped his best album yet. Now, of course, being the other half of Arm & Hammer, this is an abstract/experimental hip-hop album, and it is without a doubt the best abstract hip-hop album of the year, and one of the best hip-hop albums of the year in general. I would also say this is one of the best concept albums of the year. Billy Woods deserves to be in the discussion for the top 10 or even the top 20 all-time hip-hop artists. Ethiops is one of the most impressive, dark, poetic, and complex pieces of art to come out in the last few years. This is an album that will have you diving through university paper studies, obscure movie references, and a lot of art history as well, and a big one being the whole album cover. In short, it is a super complex project with depth in every corner, much like the 2021 Arm & Hammer release Haram. It also boasts some of the most insane production to back it up. It's not Alchemist producing this album this time, it is Preservation, but Preservation shows that he can produce near the same level of The Alchemist, and some of the production on this album is without a doubt mind-blowing, much like on Haram. This is definitely one of the most dense, cryptic, and complex albums I've listened to since like TPAP. Billy Woods' intelligent writing is on another level. It's very easy to say that Billy Woods is probably the most intelligent writer in the world right now. The way he's so effortlessly able to flip these obscure references and art history to go with the overall concept he's building on this project is insanity, and that makes the technical side of the album even more insane. Another really insane thing about this album is the features, and my god, the features on this album are pure insanity. Of course, we have that Arm & Hammer track with Elucid, Quelle Chris is here as well, Boldy James is here, LP from Run the Jewels is here, and more. Billy Woods did accomplish something really great here, and it is very crazy to witness. The feeling and the imagery this album creates is stunning, and it's not like the pen game is the only thing that's the superior on this album. Like I mentioned before, the production is like right there with it. Much like Haram, the deeper you look into this album, the darker and denser it gets. While it still is enjoyable at the surface level, once you start diving a bit deeper, it gets really insane, and it easily deserves the title as one of the best albums of the year in general. If you do need some help breaking apart this album, because there is a lot to pick apart, you can refer to like Professor Sky's breakdown of this. But even after that, if you want to dive deeper, you will have to do some research on your own, because it is insane how dense and creative and complex this album is. Let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next album.
Please came back, Black Exorcist. Clarence 13X had the white girl sick. Shimmy down the steps with the wink. Yakubian experiments gain a function in the kitchen sink. The stage plot was 108 mics, 2 centrifuges, a HEPA filtered glove box, brand new offline computers.
Simulation rebooters, new version of Gunner for Light, the voice useless.
Counting mixtapes, we are now entering the top 5, and beginning the top 5, we have what might be many people's album of the year. At number 5, I have, of course, JID or JID with The Forever Story, and man, this is a phenomenal hip-hop album. Once again, it is arguing with the rest to be the best hip-hop album of the year, but not only that, one of the best albums of the year in general, but its genre has been so overly stacked for the past few years with so many just fantastic and unbelievable hip-hop albums, so it is very impressive for it to be easily crowned as the best hip-hop album of the year, and some are saying the best hip-hop album of the decade so far even. For me, I can see it as the best hip-hop album of the year. There for sure is an argument for that, but it is not my most favorite hip-hop album of the year. There is one more hip-hop album above this one, but we will get there soon. For now, let's talk about The Forever Story. Man, this is an insane concept album. We get to hear JID's most introspective views and his most clever and intricate album yet. JID has been known for his insane flows and wordplays and his insane rhyme scheme. You can easily say JID has the best flow in the entire game. This is one of the most technically impressive albums JID has ever done, and even out of his scale, the technical performances here is one of the most impressive I've ever heard. It rivals a Freddie Gibbs, a Billy Woods, a Kendrick Lamar. The production on this album is also very diverse, super catchy, and extremely beautiful. A track like Cody Blue 31 should be illegal how good it is, and JID does also give you those bangers as well, like Dance Now, Radar, Surround Sound, and many more, which most of the mainstream was going crazy over, but the thing I was going crazy over were the tracks like Crack Sandwich, Can't Punk Me, Bruddenem, Systenem, which is one of JID's best tracks ever. The production, the performance, the concepts, the writing, everything on here is on an all-time high, while also providing addicting songs and huge pockets of just insane performances. The way I see this album is a Good Kid, Mad City. This is JID's Good Kid, Mad City. It's definitely one of the most impressive rap performances I've ever heard, and with tracks like Crack Sandwich and Systenem and the closing track 2007 with the insane storytelling, the introspective writing, and the great concepts woven in, you just get a variety-packed super fun album that has no limits. The features on this album are also insanity. Of course, there is some Dreamville features here, and J. Cole is even on the final track of the album, but there's also like Lil Wayne, Yasin Bey is on here, 21 Savage is here, so you get bangers and bops, but you also get tracks that strike right at the soul. You can easily tell JID is heavily inspired by Kendrick Lamar, J. Cole, Andre 3 Stacks, but it's not completely derivative, and he's taken his whole flow game to a new level as well. Like, this is easily Dreamville's best project ever. I do hate to say it, but it's the truth. J. Cole has nothing on this album. The only downside to an album this good is it's only downhill from here, because I cannot see himself topping this. No way. And if he does, then I will be lost for words. We will see if JID is able to overcome his previous self. Much like Kendrick Lamar when he dropped Good Kid Mad City, everyone thought that was one of the best hip-hop albums of all time. And then right after he dropped To Pimp a Butterfly. JID does have that one-of-a-kind potential, just like Kendrick Lamar, so if he is able to top The Forever Story, well, you won. I have my hands in the air. But for right now, The Forever Story is without a doubt one of the absolute best albums of the year in general, and it is my top 5 most favorite album of the year. Let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next album.
You know how this shit go when family's gone. You don't know what you here for.
Just remember who I am.
Next up, we got Danger Mouse and Black Thought with Cheat Codes. And yes, this is my most favorite hip-hop album of the year. And by that default, it is also one of the best of the year, and it is arguing for the best as well. Now, Danger Mouse has done a lot of production work for MF Doom in the past, and bands and artists like Gorillaz. But here we have a collaboration of Danger Mouse on the production and Black Thought. And as of now, this is probably the best collaboration album of the last 2 years, and I won't even argue if people put it up there with albums like Pinata or Kids See Ghosts. Black Thought is what, 50 years old, and he's rapping like he's hit a second prime, just like Nas. Black Thought is in a very similar situation here where he's been able to put out such great work at such a late point in their career. And one thing Black Thought and Nas are also recognized for is their GOAT ability. Black Thought and Nas are definitely in the conversation for the greatest of all time. This is definitely one of the most mind-blowing albums I've listened to this year, because Black Thought is at his peak prime performance right here. And behind it, we have Danger Mouse with some of the most creative and insane beats I've heard this year. The whole aesthetic, the whole imagery of this album is fascinating. And tracks like Aquamarine is one of the best Black Thought performances I've ever heard. And the writing on that is absolutely insanity. And to top it all off, the production on there is just phenomenal as well. Another phenomenal part about this album is the features. We get Raekwon on here, MF Doom, Conway the Machine, Run the Jewels is on a damn track with A$AP Rocky, and Joey Badass and a few others are there as well. There is a reason why Black Thought is regarded as one of the GOATs of hip-hop, and once you listen to this album, you will definitely find that out. I mean, it's really no surprise when you find out that Black Thought was a part of The Roots, which is the greatest hip-hop band of all time. It is just a one-of-a-kind project. 50 years old, Black Thought is still there. Everyone right now is going crazy about LeBron being in his prime so many years into the league. Well, take a listen at Black Thought. 50 years and he is hitting a second prime right now. Much like Nas, it is one of the most impressive feats I've ever seen in hip-hop history. It's just very funny, at 50 years old, Black Thought will fold your favorite rapper in half. like nothing. From the near flawless production on this track to the absolutely mind-blowing pen game and performance by Black Thought on this album, it is one of the most fun and mind-blowing experiences I've had listening to an album this year, and it is up there as one of the best hip-hop collaboration albums of all time, next to albums like Mad Villainy, Black Star, Kids See Ghosts, Pinata, the Blue and Exile collaboration. Cheat Codes is a phenomenal, one-of-a-kind album, and it is for sure my most favorite hip-hop album of the year. Let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next album, because I can just go on and on about this album.
My mind for every nickel and dime, but never less than a 5 and never slept on a job. A killer crept on your squad, yet never left the garage where your God was close enough to see the flesh of his eyes. Get to the button and press it's what the message advised. What's the threat behind the vest is where the testament lies. Everything's burning down when I close my eyes.
Top 3, here we go. Next up we got Black Country New Road with Ants From Up There. I bet no one saw this one coming, but on a real note, this is definitely regarded as one of the best albums of the decade so far, and for me as well, this is also a borderline 10 out of 10 album. My whole top 3 is pretty much borderline 10 out of 10 albums, but BCNR coming off their hot fire release, their debut in 2021 for the first time, which was in my top 20 or so favorite albums for 2021, and that was definitely one of the best post-punk albums of the year. BCNR was a part of this new wave of bands that was creating a new era for the genre, from that whole little section in the UK with bands like Black Midi, Squid, and BCNR. Their experimental and progressive style did push forward. Ants From Up There is definitely way less aggressive, but that lightning in a bottle moment on their debut was taken to a whole new level of these just fascinating progressions. The main vocalist of the band also had a very unique delivery and tone, full of endless passion and energy, and we don't miss out on any of that here. While not as experimental and wild as their debut, Ants From Up There is still incredibly unique, full of passion and energy in every corner, and just full of fantastic performances and production everywhere. It is without a doubt one of the best art rock albums in the last 10 years, and it's one of the greatest indie rock albums of all time. This is an album that will be looked back at like a classic, similar to albums such as Is This It and Funeral, and that Neutral Milk Hotel album. Like, the last few run of tracks on this thing is legendary, not to say the first half isn't legendary as well, with songs like Concord. It is sad to see Isaac step away from the band, but he definitely put his all into this one. It is a beautiful, progressive, intimate piece with some super depressing concepts and topics, backed with the grand and luscious instrumentation, and of course the absolutely phenomenal performance and unique delivery from the lead vocalist. Let's see how the band goes on without their lead vocalist. I do hate to say it, but I highly doubt they'll be able to top this, because this is a one-of-a-kind album. Let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next album. Wow, we are almost complete. At number 2, we have Soul Glow's album, Diaspora Problems. This is tied for one of the most insane albums I've listened to this year. It's a hardcore punk / rap rock album. A short way to describe it is basically Rage Against the Machine, but on crack. It is a ruthless album with super aggressive, chaotic, and raw energy in every corner. It has some of the most noisy and manic performances I've ever heard yet from any album in 2022. And on top of that, it's backed by some of the most insane production I've heard this year. Extremely heavy, and it's chaotic, noisy, and violent. It's an album that goes straight for your neck and does not give you space to breathe at all. Now, despite it being so violent, ruthless, and angry, it is very layered and dense at the same time, providing many political themes and concepts. And I guess that's where the whole passion comes from. It is just pure hatred and anger. The production and instrumentation is mind-blowing, with gunshot drums everywhere and wild guitar tones in every corner. The bass lines on this are also fantastic. It's really everything you could ask for. The production is just phenomenal. It's a very confrontational and reflective album. The perspective on this album is also very interesting. Pierce's performance and flow is also just jaw-dropping. This is without a doubt one of the greatest hardcore punk albums I've listened to in a long time, and this album single-handedly reignited that flame. It made me go back and revisit many of the great hardcore punk albums I haven't listened to in a while. Soul Glow managed to effortlessly fuse genres and create a cohesive body of work, from the mind-blowing vocal deliveries and flow to the fantastic drumming and the great guitar work. The energy on this album is unmatched, and it is without a doubt one of the most ruthless albums I've listened to, while also being incredibly dense, cohesive, and even catchy at some points. It's a borderline 10 out of 10 album for me, and it is my top 2 most favorite album of the year. Let's play a sample and we'll move on into the next album.
Which I got trust that gave me reason shit with that man. I was seeking peace, that's so fucking tweaking. That was back when 17 with mine. I ain't even speaking better time. That was over when I'm back. I was let them people die. I said I'm the root, so I don't bear the truth. I was that head, but I only know why I'm with me. That's what did this happen to. And that part that is true. And that's the teachers wanted to take some effort that me who to do. I'll be honestly, my family was lying about me. They watched me, my misery, and trouble ain't surrounding. But I'm going to the photo, the whole world my doubting. But I was in my head, but in the top of the top, yeah, I understand it. I was keeping all my shit straight, bills pay away from the I ain't with my style. It was don't wait for them to know I wasn't safe. That same night, my brother, oh my God, that same right. That was on a surprise. My love was there and she became my mom's wife.
And finally, we have the number 1, my most favorite album of the year. Without a doubt in my mind, it has to be Black Midi's Hellfire. This is the album that is tied for one of the most insane albums I've heard this year. Black Midi is one of the most fascinating bands operating right now. Hellfire is an avant-garde prog rock album. Following up the phenomenal Cavalcade, we also get hints of jazz rock in here as well. Black Midi outdid themselves, and they crafted their most tight, compact, and cohesive album yet, with some of the most inhuman performances I've ever heard. Like, the drumming and the guitar work on this album is out of this world. Then on top of that, you get Jordy Griep's super animated and passionate performance all around. The concept on this album is also mind-blowing and so well written. Each track builds upon the concept and creates just vivid imagery of this whole hellscape this album provides, with super cryptic, suspenseful, and excellent storytelling. Don't even get me started on the instrumentation on this album, because it is extremely complex. The amount of chaotic and technically rhythmic instrumentation that is layered throughout the album is just unreal. It's an album that'll just have you diving through the instrumentation alone for like hours and hours. And even on the surface, you have some of the most chaotic time signatures backed with aggressive performances, but it's not all heavy, noisy, and dark. Just like Cavalcade, there are moments in this album that are just surreal, providing mind-blowing progressions and absolutely stunning instrumentation that is delicate and dissonant. It's short, packed with heat, with only one track being an interlude. Like I mentioned before, the album's flow and cohesiveness is stunning. Morgan Simpson, the drummer of the band, is without a doubt one of the best, if not the best drummer in the world right now. The drumming and guitar performances on tracks like Sugar Zoo and Welcome to Hell is like, I don't even know how to describe it. I'm just lost for words. Like, these are humans that played this. It's some of the most greatest prog rock tracks I've heard ever. And that is a very insane thing to say because the genre is so overly stacked. This is a borderline 10 out of 10. And I wouldn't even argue if someone does have this as a 10 because it is just near perfect. And some of the tracks on here is flawless. And to think only a year later Black Midi was able to top themselves so effortlessly is even more insane. It's bands like this that create a huge new era, along with like Black Country New Road, and of course we got Squid as well, constantly pushing the envelope and breaking boundaries in every way possible. It's one of the most insane, groundbreaking albums I've listened to. It is so chaotic and complex, but intricate and intelligent at the same time. It's so meticulously crafted like a diamond jewel while having endless depth and mind-blowing performances in every corner. Keep an eye out on Black Midi because they are running to the top. Sugar Zoo is my song of the year. Eat Men Eat, Welcome to Hell, The Race is About to Begin, Dangerous Liaisons is just some of my most favorite tracks of the year as well. The track Still is similar to a track off of their previous album, Diamond Stuff, which is one of the most beautiful and stunning progressive pieces of music I've heard this year. While I do like Diamond Stuff a bit more than Still, Still is still up there. What a sentence that was. But yeah, it is the absolute pinnacle of British engineering, and it's my most favorite album of the year, and I do think it is the best album of the year as well. Let's play a sample or two, and we'll wrap up the video.
Eventually found the sinners alive. Spent reading the letters of a million wives. Some sure came when it made shit without me. The youngest executioner in tabloid memory.
As we ran, arm in arm, from the burning crater, Captain screams echo.
You fucking players ain't seen the last of me yet. I'll have the last laugh, you can soon you'll see. Each day you wake, and each night you sleep, and we can see your chest burning, burning. And we come running to the backstone of hell, with wine in our hearts and a savior's on you.
From anyone, I scoured the poor halls, the strip bars, the casinos. No man skinny enough to vaguely resemble my friend who said we'll meet at the Queen of Day. 10 grand in your pocket, don't be late. No sign of the black-clad gangman. Front page news, random killing. No gang affiliation, no mob justice. Murder! Tostita! Bruised neck I ripped! Immortalized in print!
Wow, and there we go. That was my list for my 2022 most favorite albums of the year. Once again, if you want to see the full list, links and everything is down in the description below, as well as the link to join the Discord. My 2022 playlist is down there as well. Let me guys know what you think of this list. What albums were your favorite for 2022 and which ones did you listen to from this list? But yeah, that's it. It's been John Boogle and see you.